Hey there, folks. Welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. And today's episode is a cracker. We received a question from one of you that has prompted me and Ben to open the archives, revisit one of the shows from the past, and double down on the fundamentals around Spruikers, Ben.
You're right, Bryce. This is a must-listen, highly educational show. So you've got to tune in.
All right, folks. Big episode. Let's rip into the show.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast and welcome back to you too, Ben. How are you going?
Mate, I'm good. You also seem in good spirits. We were chatting obviously off air before. Did your footy team win on the weekend?
Yeah, we had a win, mate. We didn't win, we didn't lose. It was a bye.
Oh, that's right. You had a bye. No, that's good.
No, I'm off my gap year now, mate. I'm back.
Well, that's good. I think we need to recognise.
Never lost the love for the purple, mate. It was just a frustrating start to the year, and
you can change your religion. But you can't change your footy team. Okay, got it. Okay,
go the purple. Now, do I have to indulge you? Can we? Oh, actually,
no.
You're a team of thugs. 27-year-old beating up on an 18-year-old.
Oh, hey? Give it up. All apologies were made. Yeah, we reached out. He's not that type of player. Anyway, but no.
Well. He actually looks like a better player this year, just from being around the club culture that is.
I reckon he's in a good space at the moment. I think he's maturing nicely and he's playing good footy. So disappointing for him. It was a split-second decision. He made the wrong call. Like if that had been in the 80s or 90s, the crowd would have roared. Everyone would have called him, "Oh, that's just footy, right?" But these days, the head is sacrosanct. So no. Yeah. Anyway,
age of concussion, mate. So, hey, stick around. We've got a massive show today, Ben. Like, we feel like this is potentially one of the most important shows we've done for a long time. But we've got to tip our hat to the news this week. Well, tip our hat's not right, but we've got to acknowledge that interest rates went up. So stick around. You will have a bit to say about that in what's making property news as well. So.
And we'll also, we've got a bit of a mid-year update that we want to do soon in terms of where the property market's at. So we've got more to talk about that. So, thanks for the opportunity here.
No worries. Hey, folks, we're going to cover today what we think is probably one of the most important things that we'll do for a little while. As I mentioned before, back in episode 11, we covered Spruikers and what they were. And here's a little bit of trivia, Ben. That was then. Back in episode 11... the episode went for 25 minutes. Not sure we could do it in 25 today. It was the 8th of May, 2015. Here we are on the 8th of June, 2023, some 8 years later. So that was then. This is now what has changed, if anything, right? So we're going to cover that today. Super, super important. So we feel like it is so important based on some of the anecdotes that we'll share. So stick around, folks. It is going to be a big episode. Before we get there, Ben, I'm going to run through Mindset Minute theme. For those who've been playing along at home, know that I am talking to the anecdotes from The Art of Spending by Morgan Housel. I've got to say, Ben, each and every week I continue to love the stopping and the pausing that I do on each and every one of these, which is cool. So I'm hoping that everyone at home, on the train, at the gym, doing the run, wherever they are now listening to this, is enjoying it too. Number 5 is the joy of spending can diminish as income rises because there is less struggle, sacrifice and sweat represented in your purchases. So Morgan references a William Dawson book that was written back in 1903 called The Quest for the Simple Life. And here's the quote. "The thing that is least perceived about wealth is that all pleasure in money ends at the point where economy becomes unnecessary. The man who buys anything he covets without any consultation with his banker values nothing that he buys." So And then he goes on to tell the story. Consider how you felt when you got your first paycheck from your first job. If you celebrated with as little as a milkshake from McDonald's, you probably had this amazing feeling of, wow, I did it. I bought this. I bought this with my own money. So going from not being able to buy anything to being able to buy something is amazing. So that gap is really cool. Um, he goes on then to say the gap between struggle and reward is a big part of just what makes people happy. So if you contrast that with later in your career, when hopefully you have some savings and your paychecks have grown, it's not that spending won't make you happy; it's that it won't be as thrilling, as adrenaline inducing as it was when there was more struggle behind each dollar. That's an interesting point. So he knows a guy. This is interesting. Who has a private chef. He has served 5-star meals 3 times a day, and he's had this arrangement for several years. It's amazing, and he says he'd be lying if he didn't think he was a little bit jealous around that. But he also wondered if the joy diminishes over time because he does not have to struggle to get those meals. So there is no anticipation. There is no looking forward to your favorite restaurant. There is no booking reservations. There's no contrasting gap between a normal meal and his daily delicacy that he gets served. So there's a saying that the best meal you'll ever taste is a glass of water when you're thirsty. And so he goes on to bring that together to say that all forms of spending have that equivalent. And then he quotes Richard Nixon. I've actually listened to the original Richard Nixon saying this, so I can hear his voice in my head, but it's really powerful. So he's got an interview with David Frost, and it says this: the unhappiest people of the world are those in the international watering places of the south coast of France and Newport Beach and Palm Springs and Palm Beach. They go out to parties every night. They play golf every afternoon. They drink too much. They talk too much. They think too little. They're retired. They have no purpose. And while there are those around who would disagree with this and say, wow, if I could just be a millionaire, and remember context, at Nixon's time, a millionaire was a lot, Ben, that would be the most wonderful thing in the world. If I could just not have to work every day, I'd be out fishing or hunting or playing golf or traveling. That would be the most wonderful life in the world. And this is what he says, Ben. They don't know life, because what makes life mean something is a purpose, a goal, the battle, the struggle, even if you don't win. Now, there isn't anything more true on that. It's the gap between the struggle and what you have that actually brings the joy to spending. So, the fifth anecdote here is the joy of spending can diminish as income rises because there is less struggle, sacrifice, and sweat representing those purchases. What's your reflections, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, as you were reading through that, and obviously it's the first I'd seen it. So as you were going through it, I said, yeah, if you don't have purpose and if you don't have something that you're striving for to be better at or to help others or to have meaning or to have impact, then that is a life less lived. There is no value contribution. So I tend to agree with all that. I mean, yes, we've talked a lot about the value of experiences. And in some cases, some of those experiences do, bring money to the table. You've got to have a bit of money to have these potentially amazing experiences that you reflect on later in life and so forth. But I would agree, if you've got no need to work hard for your money, you're basically compounding money is growing so quickly. You will lack direction. You'll have an idle mind, and you potentially will become a selfish, self-centered person. So I think there's you want grounding in good people around you, and you should always want a sense of learning, a sense of knowledge, and a sense of purpose. And I think if you have those things in life, you're gonna have a pretty happy life.
Can you cast your memory back to episode 200 with Paul Clitheroe, Ben? There was a number, I'm pretty sure it said it was around 70,
Yeah.
75,000, where there comes a point, a tipping point, where more income doesn't mean more happiness. And I think that really encapsulates what we just talked about, encapsulates that, because if you're on the poverty line and you're struggling to put food on the table, more income does equal more happiness. But then you get to that inflection point where once the basics are covered and you're no longer in that sense of struggle, what we've just talked about here applies. That the
Yep.
the struggle is where the joy and the happiness comes in the spending of the money, not the excess. So yeah, Wonderful, wonderful reflections, wonderful insights. And so that's the fifth. The first one was your family background and past experiences influence your spending preferences. The second one was, are you entrapped by spending? The third one was around frugality, inertia. The fourth one is the acknowledgement that the emotional attachment to large purchases. And now the fifth one is the joy of spending can diminish as income rises. So I will continue to lap through that, Ben. Hopefully it is providing our community with some insights that they can reflect on for the week ahead as we wait for the next one. As I said earlier, Ben, back in 8th of May 2015, we did a Spruikers episode. And it has been a recurring theme for you and I for the last 8 years that despite this episode and our mission of the last 8 years, which has largely been around teaching people the benefits of buying property, self-funding and retirement, but also we've dialed in on what particular asset type to buy. It's no secret that we are definitely established over new. So I recently had a spruiker reach out to me and say, I'd love to come on your podcast. Now, I get lots of reach outs to come on this podcast, Ben. So you can imagine you and I curate them pretty hard through a filter to make sure that if they come on this podcast, that they are actually people who have got the best interest of our community at heart, right? So this spruiker reaches out to me and said, I'd love to come onto your podcast and talk about what we do. Sure. Knock me over with a feather, Ben. They'd love to come on and talk about what they do. But here's the really worrying part for me, is they said, you came onto our radar because a bunch of our members said that they listened to you. And now it made sense that if we keep on hearing these people that are mentioning you, it would kind of make sense for you to come on our radar, and then they realize there's a marketing opportunity, so they figure I should come on. That is alarming to me, Ben, that if a bunch of our listeners are actually working with that particular spruiker, and we've done our very best, hopefully people have listened to the first 20 episodes to warn people against why that might need some cautionary tale attached to it, led us to go, I think we need to dust off episode 11 and reboot it, Ben, and have another conversation, because we just simply can't assume that A, everyone's listened to that, or B, it's landed to the extent that it's actionable.
Yeah, it's a constant reminder that we've got to also remember that our great community know how we stand, but some people aren't getting the full message. And we also know, when we look through the comments and the feedback that we get, there's so many reoccurring themes in that, which is along the lines of, oh, I wish I'd have found you 5 or 6 years ago, or 2 properties ago, or, et cetera, et cetera. Now, property's been pretty good right across the board. So at the moment, if you had have bought new, you've probably done okay. It's obviously around the long term. Rising tide lifting all ships sees that happen. But where we're trying to educate you is around this whole idea of basically new versus old, and the fact that new will never beat old. It's just very, very mathematically challenged to be able to beat the old or existing property returns. And so that's what we want to unpack today.
Can you hold on to that thought about being mathematically challenged, Ben? Because I think we might need to double click on that. But before we do, we got a question from one of our listeners, Ben. His name is Troy, with a suggestion that he's not quite sure where to start. So let's have a little listen to Troy's question right now.
G'day, my name's Troy Hone. I live on the Sunshine Coast. I'm 47 years of age. I have 3 children. My youngest is 10. My oldest is 16. We're at the stage right now of our lives where we'd like to start investing in a new build. Not really sure where to start. Obviously, there's lots of different companies out there that promote the build of new homes, and in the States, in Southeast Queensland. Just want to get some more confidence, I guess. Some feedback about what we should do, and just some insight from your behalf, or even if you could just direct me in the right podcast to listen to get me through this processing. Thank you very much. Look forward to hearing from you guys. Been great listening to you on the podcast. See ya.
There you go, Ben. There's a couple of things that I want to lean in on that, right? Any feedback about what we should do, strap in. We're going to give you some feedback about what you should do, and just some insights, or even if you can just direct me to the right podcast, strap in. You're at the right podcast, because we're about to help you out, Troy, and hopefully we've got you at the right time, Ben.
Yeah, it's important to understand that, and I think the first thing we need to talk about when we're talking about the way in which property spruikers operate, and as you know, if you've been listening along for a long time, I've volunteered my time to be associated with the peak industry body for property investors and the peak industry body for property professionals who help people invest in property. So one is the Property Investors Council of Australia, which I'm the current chair of, and the other one is the Property Investment Professionals of Australia, which I sat on the board of and also was the chair, I think, for around 7 to 9 years. Don't quote me, it's around those particular numbers. And the reason why I decided to volunteer my time to sit on both boards, and especially the professional side board, is the property investment industry is unregulated. And when you have an unregulated industry with a really high value ticket item and commissions and monies are floating around, there is a huge incentive for people who are very good at marketing and very good salespeople can earn a lot of money in convincing people that property investment, i.e., new or off the plan property investment, is a good thing. So that is really important to understand. So obviously, the PIPA, the Property Investment Professionals of Australia, have a code of conduct. So I think this is a nice point to start with. It has a code of conduct which is really clear about if you're a member of PIPA, so you always need to look at the companies that you're dealing with and see whether they're a member of PIPA, because that code of conduct clearly states that if you are receiving a commission, a kickback, a soft dollar, a hidden commission, any type of payment at all, you must disclose that to the consumer. Okay. And we have some other regulations around real estate in some states and territories where they should disclose that. But there are a few that hide that particular story, and I'll come back for that in a minute. But that's the most important thing here is to understand that if you're dealing with someone who's reputable and who's honourable, then you should be fully informed in the thousands or tens of thousands of dollars that they are going to receive from builders and developers for convincing you to buy their stock.
Very true. So that's the experience from you from a regulatory viewpoint. Being up, to borrow Joseph Healy's term, that's for you being up on the balcony, looking down at the dance floor, right, to see what's going on. My own experience, Ben, is in 1998. I came across a club that I enjoyed being a part of because I got to learn about property, and I was helping people buy brand new. If you've listened to the back catalogue of our podcast, I called myself an enthusiastic amateur, which meant I passionately believed in property investing as a vehicle, but I did not have enough experience to be able to see cycles, to see performance, to see what happens a decade or two later. I just knew that that was the vehicle that I wanted to be a part of. So I was helping investors buy brand new property, with hand on heart, thinking I was doing the right thing for them. Came 2006, I stopped doing that. And the reason I stopped doing that, Ben, is back in 1998, I was helping people buy properties. I can still remember the first property I helped someone buy. It was $161,000, Ben. It was a 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom property right next to the university in Bentley in Western Australia. And so the land, if you go back and have a look at that, it was great land. Like even to this day, it's a wonderful position, right? So I was in this wonderful privilege of being able to help people buy brand new properties in great land locations, right? And then what happened over time is the popularity of the process that we were doing meant that we needed to satisfy more and more people. And to be able to satisfy more and more people, you need to get more and more stock. We called it back then a stock list. And to be able to get more stock, Ben, you had to just go further and further out from the CBD. Now, at that time, I was living in Perth. I was then buying stuff in Brisbane, and we were being able to buy stuff close to the Brisbane CBD. But then over time, we were moving further and further out. And I just had this discomfort. And I can honestly tell you, I look back and I could not tell you why there was discomfort. I could not articulate it. I was just feeling more increasingly uncomfortable, going further and further out and bigger complexes. And so I decided that I wouldn't be a part of that anymore. And I jumped onto the other side of the fence in 2007 to help people buy established properties. And so from that point forward, so I come from this. We feel like this conversation is pretty grounded in experience and professionalism and regulatory oversight, because we've seen a bit in the journey, Ben, from your POV, from my POV, from my personal experience, from your personal experience, we eternally hope that this forms a foundational episode that people can share with their friends, they can share with others when they ask the question, such as we just had then from Troy: where do I start? What should I buy?
And Bryce, if I can just double click on your points there. Yes, there needs to be full disclosure here from our point of view as well. So as we go through unpacking this particular episode, we have an advisory business, a buyer's agency business, and we buy new. And our ultimate goal, new, we buy existing.
I almost had a heart attack, mate. I was thinking, what are you doing?
We buy existing, and our ultimate goal is to try and find the best locations to get the best performance over the longer term. Now, we've also documented on this podcast that that's always challenging, right? And we haven't always got it right. So just to sit here and think that we are perfect at what we do and we can constantly deliver these unbelievable returns for everyone is not true. Okay, so put that into context, number one. In second, put it into context in terms of the reason why I joined those associations, and what really lit my eyes up is I went to those seminars and I went to those events, and a lot of what they told me rang true about property, but then I was just uncomfortable about that other side of the story. Well, let me tell you, when I joined the Peak Association and when I became the chair of PIPA, and I started to see the complaint letters coming in from unscrupulous and greedy operators who were profiteering off vulnerable people, and then we started to do investigations on those particular companies, and in several cases we also expelled several of those companies, and I had to deal with the directors and the owners of those businesses, the threats, the legal threats, the systemization, the direct intent of hiding commissions. All of those rang true for many of those operators who we ultimately expelled. And there are thousands of these operators out there who are not PIPA members purely because they do not want to agree to a code of conduct that makes them stipulate how are you getting paid and full disclosure of that. Now, I also want to then finish on this sort of caveat and full disclosure piece by also saying, also on my journey, I've met a few really good businesses with honourable intent, very good platforms, good research in regards of looking at the change of demographics, looking at the population growth stories that they believe are going to add to a performance of capital growth return over time. And those businesses are members of PIPA, and they sell new and mainly house and land packages, not so much off the plan, high and medium density accommodation. They're always quite challenged in terms of their risk of performance. So, and you are going to hear from those people when you reach out to them that they've had success. They are going to stack up all of the different markets that they've had reasonable success on. And so I also want to complement, a lot of what we talk about is knowledge empowering, but only if you act on it. The biggest procrastination is taking action when it comes to property investing. So if you've found a company that is helping you to at least take action, and you're not going into an area where there's a risk of oversupply over the medium to longer term, you're going to get an okay return. Okay. And for those businesses, they might feel that that's satisfactory in terms of that there's been a win for the customer, and ultimately there's profitability for them in terms of the work they've done as a business. So we don't begrudge businesses operating in that space, but we do want to teach you the fundamentals when it comes to what you need to be looking for and what sort of returns you should expect. And that's probably the sort of 30,000 foot view.
Well, I can have a footnote to that, Ben. That property that I purchased back in Perth for 161 has definitely gone up in value. There's no doubt about it. It just becomes an opportunity cost game. Could that person with the same choice at the same time be in a different position now had they bought another asset? So, all right, let's start from the beginning. What is a property spruiker, folks? Basically, as Ben said, it's an unregulated industry. So you've got two. Just think of a spectrum. At one end of the spectrum, there's a salesperson who's got a clear interest for the person selling the product. And then at the other end of the spectrum is the advisor, who the purest advisor has a clear interest in helping the client. So on either ends of those spectrum, there is no conflict of interest. The salesperson is trying to get a result for the person they're selling the product for. It's clear, everyone understands it. At the other end, you've got someone trying to get an outcome for their client, which is advice that's not attached to any product. And then in the middle, you have what we call the murky middle, right? Which is the place that the spruiker sits in, Ben, because in reality, they are down the end of the spectrum for sales. They are getting paid by the seller for moving product. But they want to play in the space at the other end of the spectrum, which is the advisor, which plays in the advice game. They don't have a product to push. Their product is the information. It's a service. It's providing them with advice around the best outcome. Now, when you try and play both ends, that is our definition of a spruiker. They are trying to be one person when in fact they're another, and through deception or through silver tongue or through the ability to represent themselves in such a way, they're masquerading as something that they're not, Ben. And so the big question is conflict of interest. Whose best interest are they working out for? Because if you've already got a solution before you understand the client, chances are the client is not the person whose best interest you're looking out for, Ben.
Yeah, and this murkiness, Bryce, is exaggerated. So, the example that you used of a real estate selling agent, they're obviously engaged by the vendor to sell their property. And then on the other end, you've obviously from the buyer's side, you've got a buyer's agent or a direct consumer trying to buy that property. But you introduce this other party in, which are negotiating with developers and builders to move their stock. And, that's the masquerading bit, because we know that reputation and trust lives in fee for service where there is no conflict of interest. But when you are ultimately the product, meaning that when these spruikers come in and they try and sell you something, they say it's a free service to you. You don't have to pay for us to locate the best locations. You don't have to pay us to locate the best stock because we're going to do that for you. But the reality is that they are picking from a stock list and they are acting effectively as a sales promotion agent, like an extension of, a product marketer, as opposed to a classic property investment advisor.
If it's free, you are the product.
Simple.
If it's free, you become a lead. You become a product. The product is the lead, and the lead is handed over to the developer. All right, so let's talk about the investment strategy. You and I have been to our fair share of seminars over the journey, Ben, listened to a number of webinars, all those sorts of things, right? What we will say is overall, the strategy is quite sound, right? The goal is generally self-funded retirement through property. In some cases, it's riches and get rich quick and all that sort of. So that's one path, but for a lot of groups, it's sound foundation of building wealth through property to self-fund retirement. So that's a tick. What we say is that asset selection is the bit that might let them down. In fact, I'm being kind. Asset selection is what lets them down. But here's the thing: with the right incentives, people can be led to believe and defend almost anything. And so, therefore, that's what we've got to be aware of if people are getting those big incentives. So, investment strategy is okay. It's typically and if property is a game of finance just as much as it is a game of bricks and mortar, they get that usually pretty right. They know how to leverage. They know how to use finance. They know how to use other people's money. They also know that they use it as a master marketing feature around the tax, but it kind of makes sense if you could legally use your tax to help offset the cost of buying an investment property, that's great. But it's generally speaking, investment strategy is sound. Execution on the property is the bit that lets them down.
And let me tell you a story about a particular, a product seller, a stock list seller that I had a sit down chat with once. Now he tried to convince me that if he had the ability to convince the consumer that this was a good deal, and he got paid $25,000 in commission because it was a good deal, he thinks that that's completely fine. So my counter argument to him was, so it's a little bit different if you're trying to sell a gas lift chair for $350 versus, say, $150 and you've got a higher margin on that gas lift chair. That's not going to ruin that person's financial life. That opportunity cost is low. But when you're trying to convince them to buy a $430,000 house, when it's really worth, say, $400,000 because the margins are hidden in the price that the consumer's paying, he honestly felt that that was justifiable. I can't help it if they don't do their own research. I'm here to sell property. So he was anchored on this view and he justified it in his mind that was okay. And so I'm like, well, I'm agreeing to disagree. And we finished that conversation then and there. And I encouraged him that it's probably best to, obviously, if you're going to stay a member of PIPA, you better be disclosing that in your disclosure documents as part of your code of conduct. Or maybe it's probably best that you're not a member of PIPA.
Mate, if you can put your head on the pillow at night, being comfortable that caveat emptor, buyer beware is enough. Maybe.
Well, that's why they
maybe
introduced regulation.
Human.
Yeah, they introduce regulation in other areas like investments and so forth because people are vulnerable, they're gullible, right? And that, people who are convincing, who have a high trust element to them in terms of the way in which they tell the story and the narrative, and they get excited and they do the emotion story to it. That's okay. I think these guys feel legit, and they do a bit of research on them. It's not hard to find the real research on these types of companies because they absolutely trade in reputation, like all advisory businesses should. Reputation is everything because you want to be able to demonstrate that you can add value and you can deliver on what you said you're going to deliver on. And so whenever I've had those conversations, those legal threats would fly at me. Their lawyers would get involved. You're not giving my client natural justice. And you can see in some of the feedbacks that, of these spruikers, when they get negative feedback, they go straight for the jugular. This is deceptive and misleading conduct. I completely disagree. Your information is unfounded. There's not any dialogue around, okay, let's see if we can work on that. Here's what we might
Thank you
do.
for your feedback. We'd like to improve.
Yeah, they are aggressive, and they're aggressive for one simple reason, and that is about protecting their perception in the marketplace as much as they can. Because when that's gone, and we talked about this, throughout the years of our podcast, they just shut the business down and they go into hiatus, and then they'll start a new company up. And the really, really good ones who get really, really big at some point in time, to your point, which, the club that you were talking about, they start to get so many inquiries that the product that they're selling may not be, they might be inferior. And who knows, like who's selecting it? Because if they've got to buy 200 properties a month or from their stock list, who's getting, in the good locations, and are they spread out across the country? So that's the risk that people have here.
All right, so Troy, that's hopefully that helps you understand what we're talking about here, what a property spruiker is, so that you actually know what to look out for. If you want to buy from, you talked in your question about there's a lot of different companies and they build new houses. If you're clear that when you're buying from these companies and you're buying from these, you're talking to a salesperson who's selling your product, that's the first step for you to understand, so you know what a spruiker is if they're dancing in the middle. Some red flags and some warning signs for you to think about, Troy. The first one is unrealistic returns. Quite often they will talk about very above average returns, and the biggest one they talk about is fool's gold, where they cut up a piece of land and then they market that the properties that you're buying have had 20-30% capital growth in 12 months. What that actually means is that it used to be just a big plot of land. They've now cut it up into smaller lots So the median sales registered in that suburb are naturally higher because of volume and because of the number, which means that, of course, from a totally inefficient piece of land to now a more efficient piece of land, of course there's capital growth. So they trade on that, Ben.
Yeah, they trade on all that. Their big carrot is they will pick locations also where they've had some good results and some quick wins, and they will show double-digit percentage returns that they've said that they can guarantee that their clients have got. Now, you've got no view of what valuation methodology they're using. To your point, Bryce, it's artificially potentially lifting the median price up of a location if all of the old historical stock that's there is truly valued at, say, let's call it sort of 500,000, but the new stock that they're selling in that particular location is 600,000. That's ultimately lifting the median, and they're promoting that. The other little trick that they use is they declare in their communications and their advertising material the cash on cash return. And so that's a really big one for me in terms of, whilst it's a true figure, if I put $100,000 down and I get a 20% increase, they really talk heavily about that. That doesn't mean that the property value has gone up instantly 20%. It just means the money that they've put down is growing by that particular figure. So I want everyone to then understand what we're looking at, and what we measure from a long-term point of view is the CAGR, which is the capital growth annualized over a long period of time on the value of those properties. Because again, we're in it for the long term. We want a long-term performance that's sustainable for the client, and then ultimately delivers them the passive income.
So unrealistic returns are a red flag or a warning sign. The next one is downplaying risks. Properties, like all investing, it's inherently risky. There's a whole bunch of risks attached to it that you need to be aware of. So market volatility, vacancy rates, quality of tenants, maintenance, regulatory risks. It is a wonderfully what we love about it is the lack of volatility in its performance, but there are a bunch of risks that you need to be involved with. So if you start to hear them downplaying risks, that's a red flag. Ben, membership fees to join communities is another one.
Yeah, I mean, this is the classic get them into the community, stack the value in terms of all of the values around free reports, insights, access to, materials and the like. And then I'm getting quite excited. I'm being involved with other members. I tell one of the great stories of when one particular business was flying people up to look at new house and land packages. One of my favourite stories, because it's very clever from a sales point of view. But effectively what they would do is they'd make sure who gets in the same van, in the minivan. They would have at least one person or two people who have already bought one or two properties that they've done okay on. And so then the new people come in and they get to meet each other. And so there's safety in that selling process. And then they finish up, at the end of the day, after looking at potential locations, that there's this, seafood smorgasbord. So, here's what my rich life is going to look like afterwards. So very, very clever marketing tactics to be able to be part of that particular thing. Because, if you were feeling a little bit unsure and a little bit skeptical, having other people tell you about that and putting all that together. Now, businesses do testimonials. We do testimonials. There's nothing wrong with doing testimonials and also showing past performance. That's fine. But all we're sort of saying here is that there is this, right, there's a sales agent on the front, someone who's very good at selling people, that gets you into a community. And those selling people can earn enormous amounts of money, right? We're talking in terms of, if you're in a big property business, in terms of property investment business, and your job is to engage those people into the membership community, you can be earning in the vicinity of $300,000. I have no problem with what people earn, but that they're obviously a commission incentivized. They're earning that big money because anyone who then buys through the club or through their membership program, they're getting obviously commissions split from the big commission that's paid overall to the company. Everyone's getting basically their fingers are in the pie, earning some of that commission.
It's not necessary to pay an entrance fee to be in a community, because if you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with, it makes sense that if you spend a lot of time hanging around with people who say that you can't self-fund, it might be appealing to go and join a community, Ben, that of like-minded people. But a lot of the times you're going into these communities, you're paying a fee to be in the community, and you're paying a fee for the right to be sold some more properties down the track, right? So it's not necessary to pay an entrance fee to just be in a community. So now, we don't know every single business model in
No.
this country. To Ben's point earlier, there might be a bunch of people that do operate legitimate communities where they're adding value. So I don't want to discredit those. But what I want to do say is this is under the topic of red flags or warning signs. So they're not, I didn't say avoid at all costs. They're just red flags and warning signs. So that's something to think about. Hidden commissions. It's hard for anyone to see hidden commission if it's hidden. So it's kind of, is this a red flag or a warning sign if you can't see it? Well, we just want to bring your awareness that they exist, right? Back in mid 2000s, I'm really stretching my memory now, but I think the Queensland government brought in the 27B and the 27C disclosure statement, which wasn't the case prior, which meant that you had to disclose everything. So the way that the developers got around that was they disclosed in the 27C the commission at standard REIQ rates on the settlement of the land. So everyone thought, oh, that's great. But that meant that they were able to bypass the need to disclose the commissions between you as the spruiker and the building company that they could pay you in the building contract. So full disclosure on the land, no problem. Everything looked above board, but you didn't realise that they were paying very, very exorbitant commissions that were hidden. So what's the point of bringing it up here for you, Troy? Is just to say, have an awareness that there are sometimes you only see the bit of the iceberg above the water, but there's a bit below that at least some form of awareness is going to help you.
Yeah, look, I could be really aggressive here and say, if you're sitting in front of a business and you're not sure whether they've got any hidden commissions, ask to see the books. Ask to speak to the general manager or the director of the company and say, are you willing to show me how your revenue comes into the business? And if they have their financials audited, let's see where the money's coming from, because then you can make that connection. And I know this is hard. Like a forensic accountant would pick it up in 5 minutes. It's hard, but just asking that question in terms of, so is this all the commission that you earn? Because a lot of those sales agents at the front would not even know about what's happening in the back door, right? So they've come in, they've been sold on earning lots of money. They're sales agents. That's what they do. I understand that. And then they say, here's the money that we earn. And so that's money that we're going to share between all of you in commissions. And they don't even know that, as to your point, once the property settles, there might be further commissions that are coming through the developer, the builder, through their side company into a different side company of the company that's running. And to the sales agents, they think they're telling the truth. This is basically all that's being done. So simple questions like, do you have multiple companies? How do they operate? How does all of that come through? And if the sales agent can't answer it, say, well, is there anyone in the business that I can talk to that would allow me to answer those questions, right? Or put something in writing to me. And then ultimately you will have that disclosure. And if they tell a lie, they're obviously in big trouble when it comes to the Corporations Act.
And if you ask those questions that Ben just said, trust your gut too, around how you perceive the non-verbal language that you get around that, i.e. some body language or some movements and all that sort of stuff. So unrealistic returns, downplaying risks, membership fees to join communities, hidden commissions. The last one here for red flags and warning signs, you've already covered, Ben, is just being very aggressive against negative feedback. If you see that, you see some of that feedback online, it doesn't mean anything other than a red flag, because some people have, received feedback out of character and it's not fair, and they're doing their work to try and fix it. But a lot of the times, it should be a red flag if they're being aggressive.
Yeah, and I'm handling a particular client in our business at the moment, which we just haven't had a good relationship. It just hasn't gone well for them. And so, again, I want to say that you can't be all things to all people, and no businesses are ever going to have 100% great reviews. That is also true. I've been in business long enough to understand that. And in some cases, there are views of what value that I got versus whether there's alignment. So all of those are really true. So sometimes you can't change that person's truth, and sometimes people are going to have their own truth. That is also true as well. What you're looking for is patterns. There can be the odd one here and there. You're looking for those patterns, but you're also looking for just I'm really sorry. How difficult was that? Is there any way in which we can sort that out and rectify the situation? All of those things are really positive signs that the business is working in the best interests of their customer, not necessarily in the interest of protecting a reputation or being aggressive around that.
Very good. I'm going to talk about some tactics here, Ben. We might lean in on a couple and leave them at headline level, but there's a few things that are common amongst spruikers. Back in our day, Ben, there used to be lots of seminars in hotels.
Mm-hmm.
They've obviously moved those seminars to online now, but there's lots of events that you can get to. So anywhere where they're gathering people, because generally speaking, the only barrier to entry to become one of these spruikers is, in our experience, is to get a haircut and buy a nice suit and create a perception that you actually know what you're talking about. So seminars, events, we've talked a bit about high returns, but guaranteed rentals used to be massive, Ben, which preys on the fear and the anxiety of people not being able to get a tenant. So they understand that that's a trigger, and if they can overcome that trigger, they'll do that. The challenge with guaranteed rentals is it's inflated in the price, and you're getting your own money back in the form of security. And so what happens is you've got to be careful of the buffer. So let's say, I don't know, for argument's sake, the market rent's $450. They say we'll guarantee 500. Well, they're just giving you $50 back a week for the 12 months that they've got the guarantee in place. And then when that happens, you're just left to the market forces. So you need to be understanding what that is. Limited availability. You've got to act now. There's only a few left. That is clearly a tactic that works in all walks of life, Ben. It happens everywhere, so the property industry is not immune to that. There's a couple more there too, Ben.
Yeah, obviously there's FOMO. I can come back to the profit guarantees on the rental inside. One thing we haven't seen a lot of lately, because there is really low supply and high demand, is also land rebates. We've been doing this for a long enough time to also know that developers and those types of people were putting land rebates of 10, 20, 30, 50 grand in to move the final bits of stock. So, at the end of the day, if you did a bit of research and you worked out the per square metre of land value, you would work out that actually that's what it's selling for anyway. So they are another example of some of those common tactics that would be used to try and convince you over loan. FOMO is real, that fear of missing out, that sense of urgency around that. There's the high pressure selling stuff that we've talked about before. These people are very, very good. They know how to handle objections. They do a very, very good job of handling objections. They usually consistently don't sell to locals, so they're usually setting up very, very big social media campaigns these days and bringing people into the classic webinar stories and selling them on the dream, and then effectively, still selling borderlessly, but in a lot of cases, you're taking their word for the location, you're taking their word for the research and the demographics and any reports that they're producing. So always be careful and double check some of those reports. There's a massive, massive, massive focus on tax and also depreciation. So the tax story here is the depreciation story. We're going to get into this a little bit more, but what we're talking about here is this concept that you are losing money by the liability side of the property. In other words, the depreciation of the asset, the building, the improvements on the land, and you're celebrating that. Now, we've always talked about how important depreciation schedules are, but the reality is because they help with cash flow. But in reality, it is still a loss. So it's a paper loss. And ultimately, we want to create a gain here by owning this particular property. So that's a big one. Aggressive mortgage paying down strategies. We see a lot of that to get you in. In our cases, if you've got a cash flow positive property, that means you'll be able to pay it down quicker and you'll be able to rinse and repeat. And Even another sort of sales tactics are classic ones of Qantas frequent flyer points or any other type of holiday incentives as part of, you buy our house and land package, we'll give you a 7-night holiday in Fiji. Now, they haven't had to do that for the last few years, but when times are tough, these are the types of additional incentives, because what it's telling you is that there's margin in the deal, right? They're in the business of making profit, and ultimately there's enough profit in the deal for them to also factor in a $12,000 holiday, or to factor in paying tens of thousands of dollars in commission to these intermediaries, these sales companies.
So one of the things you said before, Ben, was the high pressure and manipulative sales tactics. I just want to make it super clear to you, Troy, and everyone who's listening to this. There is, in my view, there is only one point of pressure that you should feel in the whole experience, from I'm interested in investing to executing. There should be only one point of pressure. I want to make this clear. There should never be any pressure to become a client. There should never be any pressure to become a client. The only time I see pressure exist is this. And I've said it to every client that I've helped, Ben, and all of our buyers agents in the business say this to the client. We are never in a hurry to find a property, but when we find a property, we're in a hurry. So what does that mean? It means there is a bit of pressure all round to get the deal done. Now, we are competing because we don't have a stock list, Ben, because what happens with a stock list seller is the pressure is at the front, but there's no pressure at the back. Because if they got you in, then they've got this big, extensive stock list and we'll go, we'll choose number 13 for you, right? And there's no pressure outside to say, oh, I'm fighting for 13 as well. Whereas in our world, we're actually going for 22 Smith Street, and we're not the only one interested in 22 Smith Street. There's the neighbour across the road. There's the person who wants to move interstate. There's the other buyer's agent. There's a whole bunch of people. If we've done our job right, there should be competition because we're buying the best properties. So there's a little window of pressure that's not a manipulative tactic. It's just a genuine suggestion to the client that we have now found a property. We're not in a hurry to find a property, but now that we've found a property, we're in a hurry. So there is pressure to act. There is pressure to give yes or no quickly. There is pressure from the team to say, we've got to jockey for position. Sometimes we've got to pivot here. Sometimes we've got to take this tactic here. There's a bunch of stuff that goes into that negotiation window that is pressure. I am not going to lie, but it should not be high pressure to get you to act. It should just be a pressure environment to actually get you in the game if you've got the right people. So I think that's really important, that at the front of the bus, if you're feeling enormous pressure just to be a client of theirs, that is a tactic that they employ and should be a red flag for you. So you've covered off a few good ones there, Ben. Seminars, high returns, guaranteed profits, limited availability, FOMO, scare of urgency, high pressure sales tactics. They don't sell to locals. There's that heavy focus on tax, aggressive mortgage pay down strategies, and action incentives like holidays. So there you go. There's some common tactics. Hopefully this is helping you, Troy. The next question is, how do they get paid? This is the question you must know the answer to. If you have bought an investment property from anyone and you don't know the answer to this question, that is a red flag for you. Because you shouldn't buy a property until you understand how this works. So to give you an understanding, a real estate agent gets anywhere between 1% to 3%. Some of the best agents get more, right? But 1% to 3% of the sale price as a commission paid to them at settlement. No sell, no eat. So what does that look like? Well, for a $500,000 property, at 1%, they will earn $5,000. At 3%, they'll earn $15,000, and then that'll trickle through to the principal, and they might end up with 40 to 50% of that. So on $1 million, the real estate agent at 1% gets $10,000. At 3% gets $30,000. That's on $1 million. So a buyer's agent is on the other side, does the same thing. So if they buy a property at the same $500,000, the same applies. Now, you could have a percentage of purchase price. You could have a fixed fee. We do fixed fee. We're not going to go into that right now, but you've got a choice between percentage of purchase price or fixed fee. Here's the fundamental difference. If you're a project marketer, if you're someone who gets paid by the developer, these are the typical commissions, 6 to 10%. So the real estate agent's typical is 1 to 3. A project marketer's typical is 6 to 10%. So let's run the maths. On $500,000, Ben hinted this earlier, on $500,000, purchase price, that project marketer gets 30 at 6% or 50 at 10%. What if you're buying something for 700,000? They get 42,000 at 6% or 70,000 at 10%. What about if you bought something for $1 million? Well, 60,000 to 100,000. Now, admittedly, a lot of these spruikers don't play in that high-end price point. They normally play in the 500 to 800 price point, so that's okay. But you're getting a bit of a sense here that they're getting between $30,000 and $80,000 if they're at that $800,000 level in commissions. That is extraordinary. Do the maths. That is extraordinary. They are making a lot of money. So what does that mean for them? They got a lot of money to spend on marketing to try and get your attention because they've got lots of fat in the deal to go and buy lots of ads, to run lots of seminars, to run lots of free holidays, because there is just a ton of money, Ben.
There is, and in some models that we've seen out there, Bryce, the people who are doing the converting on maybe this property and this location, and so let's just hold that one for us now. They're not even real estate agents. Like in some cases, that package then gets handed on to the real estate agent to put the contract of sale information together. So there's lots of people in the process who are all taking a clip of the ticket. And that's another example of ways in which they sometimes get around commission disclosures, because a real estate agent needs to disclose commissions, whereas these marketers or salespeople, as part of a workflow process that these spruiking companies set up, don't even do that. I spoke to Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. They're great people. They're soul to the earth people. They qualify. I went into their house, had an in-home consult with them. I showed them 4 properties. They picked that one. They really liked the depreciation and the tax. It was only going to cost them $28 a week to hold. They love that idea. They love the idea of what it's going to provide them in retirement. So can you put that deal together, please? Next, and they're not even registered real estate agents. So that's where it becomes even, so there's no formal qualification. You just got to basically be a good talker. So I think that's really important to remember in some of those cases. Now, I would say from the project marketing point of view that Bryce talked about, project marketers technically that are putting the deal together have to be authorised representatives or licensed estate agents to be called project marketers or to call themselves real estate agents.
Yeah, well, and the qualification when I got my sales qualification in Perth, Ben, back in 1999, it was 4 weeks full-time in class to get it. Now you can get it in a couple of weeks, and you don't have to commit that amount of time. So it's not that hard to get that. The full license is tough, but the sales rep is a whole lot more manageable. So the barrier to entry isn't that massive. So we asked the question, Troy, for you. You must ask the question: how is the person getting paid on the deal that you're looking to buy? If you're going to buy one of these brand news, we'll state a case why we think you should buy established in a second. But if you were going to these companies and they're recommending new builds and you want to talk to them, you need to know how this works. You need to know how they get paid. All right. So here's some example marketing hooks for spruikers over the journey, Ben. It's nowhere near exhaustive. It's just 3 examples of how spruikers have used an angle to get people to buy product. The first one is called NRAS. It's the National Rental Affordability Scheme. It was introduced back in 2008. It was a housing affordability play. Yes, housing affordability has been an issue for a while, Ben. It was a housing affordability play. And it gave incentives for investors to offer below market rent. It needed to be at least 20% below. So what does that mean? Well, the spruikers had a wonderful playground to move stock, because what they did is they preyed on the anxiety around getting a tenant. They go, wow, think of this. You could find tenants for under market value. So that's what they focus on, the actual tenant, rather than the performance of the asset. It became a playground for moving stock. That's one example.
Yeah, well, and just because they got the tax offset, so you could put the 20% rent lower for attracting people into that area. For again, that's a good economic policy to get the right people into a location. But that's what you got. You got a tax benefit, and that's basically what they preyed on.
So that's one hook, Ben. The second hook that we're going to talk about today is SMSF. So back in 2007, they introduced the arrangements for limited recourse borrowing arrangements in self-managed super fund. So now, quick sort of breakout note here. Buying property in super funds is not the issue here, folks, because in some cases, subject to your circumstances, they might be a wonderful choice to do. It's a good tax environment. There's a bunch of things where you could do. But why was it a playground for Spruikers to move stock, you might wonder? Well, because they would aggressively market the idea of this is a way that we can move stock. So we would encourage people, even on low balances, to use their super as a way to move new stock. Now, because depreciation isn't as beneficial in super because it's a 15% tax environment, they obviously chase different style of assets that increase the amount of yield that you can get within that. So therefore fails the owner-occupier test in a lot of cases. But the point being here is it became a hook. It became a playground for the spruikers to move stock through SMSF, Ben.
Bryce, can I tell a quick story? Back in the days where we were able to meet and, we'd always have these expos and events and you'd be able to walk around the floor. One person came up to me once to tell me a story and he said, I was working at a particular spruiker business, a very, very large one. And at one point there, we were told on the phones to qualify people. So outbound calls, qualify them. Do they have a super account? And encourage them to set. You can buy investment properties. If they didn't qualify with their own income and equity in their personal names, the pivot was to try and set them up in a self-managed super fund. How much do you have in your super? Oh, you can combine that together and you'll be able to get a property. Oh, really? Anyway, he felt so uncomfortable about that. He raised it with his sales manager. The story he tells is the sales manager came out of his office, got up on one of the chairs in the big call center and says, if you don't like what we're doing here, if you don't believe that this is about selling, then you're in the wrong business. Get out.
I'm sure it dropped another F-bomb in that as well.
Yeah. I've obviously sensitized it in terms of what was actually said. But I'm sitting there listening to this type of story and I was like, it was a big operation on the Gold Coast at the time. And I'm like, wow. I mean, these people honestly think that it's like there's every 15 seconds some dummies being born and they're gullible and we can take advantage of them. I mean, it's the Wolf of Wall Street type mentality. If you've seen that movie, that's exactly the approach that we're sort of trying to paint this picture of. Greed is good. Making money is good. If these people don't do their own research, it's okay. And that is completely against what our industry should be representing and what a professional advisory business should be representing, because it ruins people's lives. And that's why we have regulation in other parts, but we wish one day we could also get it in the property investment space.
It's a great story to give. Real estate's an insider's game. It's not an outsider's game. So what you just did then is give an insider's story to give people really insights on what's actually happening. So NRAS, and make no mistake, Ben, that's not a criticism of providing affordable accommodation, right? So that's a separate part of the conversation. It's just how the spruikers use it as a playground. SMSF doesn't say it's not a good policy. It's just how they use it as a playground. And then the third one I want to talk about, recently one crossed my desk. I shared it with you the other day, Ben, around fully ramped up house and land packages on the promise of upscale income from the NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Scheme. So this is now the newest playground for spruikers to move stock. Now, there are a bunch of people, Ben, who require houses that allow them to facilitate their disability. That is not on the table here for discussion because that is real.
It's wonderful. Right? It's wonderful that we're providing that type of stock for those in need.
100%. But here, in this context of this conversation, it is now a new playground for spruikers to move stock, because what they're doing is at the heart of all of these schemes is the certainty of securing a tenant to distract from the underlying asset. They are using a hook, they are using an angle around the security of the tenant, or in your case, as you said before, the fact that you don't qualify in your own name might mean that if you and your partner qualify, if you combine your supers together, it is something that Troy, you need to be aware of, because these things are going to cross your path as hooks for reasons. And we're going to tell you how to protect yourself shortly, but these are just three examples of what we've seen over the journey.
And a reminder that there are some legitimate players in these particular spaces as well. So again, do your research and homework on the reputation, on the years of experience, how long they've been around for. Those types of things will show up. Length of tenure of their staff. All of those are really good clues that will help you.
Very good. So nice segue, Ben, because the next thing we want to talk about is how you protect yourself, right? The first one is research. Research the company. To Ben's point, is there a positive digital fingerprint for the company out there? Go and read some reviews. Go and ask some questions. Go and do some due diligence. There's Google reviews. There's social media accounts. There's online forums. And to be honest, look for clusters. To Ben's point, because we're not bruise free online, right? But look for clusters. Is there a cluster of similar feedback that you're getting, or is there overwhelming evidence that they've got some great reviews on Google, they've got some great testimonials, they've got some great videos? Like, it usually comes in terms of volume rather than just having one or two. So you need to go and research the company that you're involved with. And number two, you need to go and research the market that you're thinking of buying. So go online and see what other properties have sold for, other properties outside of the opportunity. It's not that hard. The portals make it super easy. You click a suburb, and then there's a little tab at the top that says sold. And you just go and do some research. It doesn't take you long. It doesn't actually take you long to go and see what's sold. It's actually harder to do research on the buy tab than it is on the sold tab, Ben, because sold tab's actual and buys is there's no historical component to it. It's just willing buyer meeting a willing seller. So number one, to protect yourself. It seems really simple, but a lot of people just don't do it.
No. Well, I know. What do I say? I think we've drummed that in. But
We've drummed that in.
Here's the other big story, right? Here's how you protect yourself, Bryce. Ready? Drum roll. Buy existing property, people. But there is some science to that. Now, we've talked a lot about owner-occupier appeal. Check out all of our other episodes on asset selection and what we look for, scarcity, the economic drivers, human indicators. So remember, demand, supply, all of those scores, mushing all those things together. Episode 418, we take a really big deep dive into short-term supply and demand, long-term performance, and long-term capital growth performance. That episode unpacks what we talk about in terms of all of those things. So please take a listen to that. But here's the deal. Why, right? Why are we saying buy established property over new property? It's because it delivers an ultimate better return. So if all things are equal in terms of putting two properties side by side and buying something new versus buying something existing, the secret sauce, everyone, are you ready for this? Is in the land to asset ratio. We have been talking about it since the start of our pod, and that is ultimately land appreciates and the building or the improvements on the property technically depreciate. And so when it does depreciate, if you have a higher land value at the start of the investment, then you are going to get a higher return. If you have a higher improvement value, i.e. the building, compared to your land, you will never be able to mathematically get a better return when you think about compounding return over time. And it's as simple as judging, just do the maths for yourself. $400,000 land value versus a $600,000 land value. Ultimately, the $600,000 land value is going to outperform. So if the final value of those properties is $850,000 and most of it's in the actual new bling, shiny improvements on the land versus in the actual land value, you've got it wrong. It's got to be the other way around. And we've talked about it being 60% as a minimum for freestanding houses. If you get around that 60% mark for existing homes, you're in the ball game. You're absolutely in the ball game. Now, it's in terms of townhouses, it can fluctuate. It's a little bit harder. And this is where you start to think about differently townhouses and villas, because it's the location of the land that then comes into play. Okay, so it's thinking about the livability, that economic activity, and all of those types of things is real. So if you do all the maths, and I don't care where you're going to sit there and say, but I look at all the depreciation I get. Well, the depreciation is writing down the value of that home. It's and it's just offsetting a tax liability, and all you've done is just made that tax liability a little bit less. We still get it done for cash flow, but I'm making the important point. And if you ever sell the property, it adds back to it reduces, your capital cost. So you are actually ultimately still going to pay that back if you ever sell the property. So it's really clear to me that if you do want to get the best return, buy existing, don't buy new.
Amen to that. So let's put a little bit of numbers around this. Let's just assume 500,000. If the land's worth 300 and the building's worth 200 on a established, or another one in an adjoining suburb that's 500,000, but the land is 200 and the building is 300, right? That's why it's mathematically impossible for a new property to outperform an old property, because of the land component. So you said 60%. If the value is 300 in land in a 500 purchase price, that's 60% land to value, land asset ratio. If you do the other one, it's $200,000, which is 40%, right? So that's what we're talking about here, folks, because the bling is that's the distraction. That's the magician trying to get you to look over here, whilst the real thing is being done on the side. So it's the distraction that you're trying to avoid. So it's impossible for new property to outperform old property. Go and do the maths. Just go and do that example. Just put the same growth rate, and then work out the depreciation. You are better off on the established property.
But Bryce, I'm also told that sometimes I get stamp duty exemptions. Sometimes I get rental guarantees. I get all of these other incentives. But again, even if you add all of them up and you do that calculation over a 5, 7, 10, 15-year period, the ultimate return is still better in the existing property because the value is in the land. And we've always talked about making sure that you think about that. Now, again, we've talked about the Veblen effect, and we've talked about certain owner-occupier, peer and character homes. You do get a beautiful little emotional element of where they will do outperform. So they are outlier properties. But if you're just thinking about doing the fundamental maths, all things being equal, it's impossible for a new property to outperform an old property. And that's part of what we've been saying all of this time, why we still go after that. So, you're paying for builder profits. You're paying for the commission that goes into that particular property. If I could add something further here around, it doesn't take long if you are being promoted to buy from that stock list to do your own analysis of finding a similar block in the same subdivision, and then talking to another mass volume builder and putting those two things together. You will save yourself between 15 to 30% on the build cost, because the land is still the land, right? Ultimately, if you've got two blocks of land in the same subdivision, unless they've got elevation, and that means they've got city views, or there are all of those other, but block for block, square metre for square metre on typical comparable land, it's the improvements that you put on that and the ultimate land value that's going to give you your ultimate return.
Now, developers want the lowest possible land to asset ratio, because that's how they make their money. If they can pay less for the land and put more product on, that's how they make the money. So that's what we're looking for. There is a conflict in what the developer wants and what the investor wants. The investor wants the highest possible land asset ratio, and the developers want the lowest possible ratio. Now, here's another thing for you, Troy. What developers call a growth corridor, investors should call a supply corridor. Let that land, because I promise you this, supply is a kick in the groin for growth. Supply is the enemy of growth. So if you have got a developer who says, buy in this growth corridor, what that actually means, it is a growth corridor from their point of view. It's like when you have a bank statement, Ben, and it says the debit and the credit, and it's from the bank's point of view, not from your point of view. It's the same. Growth corridor is from the developer's point of view. because it is growth, because there is lots of opportunities out there. They can release more land and more land. Supply is the enemy of growth, folks. So that is something you need to be aware of.
And we've been really critical on house and land here. Let's talk about off the plan, medium and high density. If you're talking about a rezoning, and we talk about this in detail in episode 418, where we're talking about productive use of land, right? So if you've bought an old house that was built 30 years ago on 800 or 900 square meters of dirt, you will be able to equity harvest that, and that's something that's adding value. But what I'm talking here about is when the government rezone an area for medium or high density, that actually puts stress on your supply side when you're talking about units or apartments. So that's the other piece in here. So if ever there is an area that we can quickly find, we say, hey, I need an example, Bryce, of where, something that was bought in 2008 is now currently worth the same price. We just start looking for high-rise apartments in city locations. It doesn't take us long to do a match in terms of this thing hasn't moved. Like, all of these people paid $630,000 for these properties in 2008, and they're still selling for the same price today because, again, there was no demand. It was oversupplied. And ultimately, at some point it'll grow over the next 20 or 30 years, but it's the opportunity cost that's attached to that. And so that's part of the message. So one side is it'll never outperform, but on the other side, it's the opportunity cost then in terms of being able to make sure that your dollars are working hard for you.
That's the point, Ben, the opportunity cost. So, Troy, this is the last thing we'll say about the property selection, that the hack here is property age. It's the biggest bang for buck that you'll get in your research. The older the asset, the more likely to be that the price is reflecting the land to asset ratio. So what you're paying reflects that, which then over time, the compounding impact comes from the high land to asset ratio. So hopefully that's helped there for how to protect yourself. There's a couple of other things. The devil's in the detail, so you've got to read the contracts carefully, have them checked by an independent rep, and do some due diligence on the ground before you buy, either personally or through a trusted proxy. And what does a trusted proxy mean? Someone who is engaged on your behalf to act in your sole interest without a conflict of interest.
Bryce, there are buyers agents out there who, on a set fee, will basically do their own comparables for this type of thing. And it doesn't take, it's maybe 2 or 3 hours of work for those to do that type of work, but they can give you an independent assessment in terms of what you're actually getting into. Now, if there's not a lot of details about the building costs and all of those, I think that could take longer, but you could pay several $1,000s for that independent assessment. But it could be several $1,000s of good money spent, because ultimately that gives you that opportunity.
All right, folks, full disclosure time for Ben and for me. So we have a business. So how do we differentiate ourselves? Okay, when someone first comes into our business, we charge a fee for service to build them a plan, to build them a roadmap. The product is the blueprint. There is no other sort of attached product to that. So there is no conflict of interest there. You pay a fee to receive the advice that's presented in a blueprint for you to follow. If you want to follow that blueprint, you can go to a buyer's agent who charges a fee for service. And whenever the buyer's agent buys from someone selling, there is 0% earned from anyone else in the transaction. It is 100% income earned from the buyer. So the roadmap says I've got to buy an asset. So we facilitate the purchase of the asset. And then for 99% of people, they need finance. So our finance team then facilitates the strategy around what what lending they need. And yes, the banks do pay for that. They pay an upfront fee and they pay a trailing commission. So the client doesn't need to pay for that because the bank does. We then pass it over to the financial planner to build a moat around them so they can protect as part of our defense strategy. Income protection, total permanent disability, a bunch of defense mechanisms to protect the main asset during accumulation, which is the ability to earn an income. If you can't earn an income, it all falls over. So if we do a strategy involved in that's separate to the original strategy, That is a direct fee for service. Otherwise, if we put those insurance products in place, the industry has a payment for those insurance products. So they've got to show reasons why you need to be part of that, and they're fully disclosed up front. And then our tax business charges a fee for service. Would you like us to trade our expertise in order to maximize the amount of tax refund you get from being a property investor? There is no conflict of interest across that group. We are not selling any other products outside of representing ourselves in the best interest of the clients, Ben. So it's only fair that we disclose everything up front about how our business works.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And, obviously we're members of the Property Investment Professionals of Australia, and we abide by the code of conduct, which is, here's what we get paid, this is what it looks like, and there's no commissions, soft dollar referral money, there's no marketing dollars sneaking in, there's no money coming in around the corner. It's all completely transparent, as other good reputable businesses and the businesses that we've had on this podcast, you can take it as given that they are reputable businesses, because we've interviewed those people on here and we do our due diligence in terms of, there are great businesses in the property investment space. There are great mortgage broking businesses. There are great buyers agency businesses out there as well, right across this country. And we recommend that you take a look even on the PIPA website. You can actually search for PIPA members as well. So we want to make it really clear from our community point of view that we think the marketplace needs to be regulated, but because it's not, this is the type of businesses that you see. They are very well funded because they get big commissions and they reinvest a fair bit of that money back into obviously continuing to grow their memberships and then ultimately sell those people. So again, I also want to reiterate that some of them are very reputable and do an excellent job. But the questions you need to ask, Bryce mentioned to you earlier, was how are you paid? How do you work? If it's a free service, ultimately somebody's paying. Who's paying? Oh, well, it's the developer and we get a bulk buy deal. And because we get a bulk buy deal, or because there's no marketing that they need to do, we get those savings passed on to us. Well, I say do your due diligence. Compare exactly what they're offering you on paper with exactly what I said before. Another subdivision of land in the same subdivision, and then find another builder and see whether those prices stack up, because it's somewhere in the middle. There's no such thing as no cost associated with that. So yes, if they do have a bulk buying opportunity, maybe there is the ability where the builder has negotiated on their raw materials. So that can be true. I don't want to sit here and say categorically that it's not true, but ultimately somebody is paying. So whether it's the supplier of the bricks, whether it's the supplier of the chipboard, or whatever it is to build it, or whether it's ultimately you paying for that through these intermediaries that are selling these investment properties.
Here. So the timeless principles to help here for you, Troy. Number one, create depreciation, don't buy it. What does that mean? If you buy established properties, at some point in time, they're going to need an upgrade. When you upgrade them through a renovation, you will create depreciation so you can get the tax breaks. So create it, don't buy it. Number two, tax breaks are the cream, not the milk. So we're not denying that the tax breaks are wonderful opportunities for you to, through the accumulation phase, help you fund the properties. That is true. But they are the cream, not the milk. They are not the reason that you get into the property in the first place. And number three, owner-occupiers, this is to quote Ben, owner-occupiers are price makers, investors are price takers. We have talked a lot about that in previous episodes, but it's basically saying chase properties that have owner-occupier appeal for the mere fact that you want to get sucked along from the ride from the price maker, not struggling in the lane of the price taker. And the last one, Ben, I'd say is take advice. If you're in doubt, take advice. So, which leads to something that I riffed with you a little earlier about the tiers of advice. What are the tiers of advice? Who should you be looking for? Well, there are 6 tiers of advice, and you'll be able to use this as a filter in any endeavor that you come across in life. We're obviously just bringing it in the context of property. First tier, and the number one tier, is someone who has been there and done that and taken other people like you there. So they've done it through experience, and they've also got a track record of actually taking others there. That's the highest form of advice that you can get. The second level is someone who has not been there and done that, but they have taken people like you there. They've actually taken the person to the summit. Number 3 is someone who's only done it themselves, but hasn't taken anyone else there. Number 4 is someone who's witnessed the process multiple times, but doesn't have any experience in the game. The 5th level is witnessed the process once, and the 6th level is everyone else. Cousins, aunties, uncles, well-meaning friends.
Get the advice down the pub. Hey, I really love this framework. And, as you were talking through it, I had obviously the Everest as the summit. And so, if I'm going to climb the summit, I absolutely want to be with someone who's climbed it before, and has taken other people there, because that shows me the ultimate experience. But then when I get to that next layer there in terms of taking other people there, I then start to think about cardiac surgeons. Surgeons may not have had a heart attack, but they know how to treat heart attacks because they've treated other people. But to be a surgeon is years in the making. So I've gone through all of those processes. I originally witnessed an operation. I've then, witnessed multiple operations before they let me use the scalpel. And then, I've been there with other people who are doing it in the real time. And then I ultimately get to take over. And that's how we create those great surgeons that save our lives. And so if you think about that from an advice point of view, I really like that framework, mate.
And I want to leave this conversation, Ben, before we pivot to what's making property news, with a story from Uncle Warren that I read recently. I think it really sums up today's episode. It was a story about a guy who knows Warren Buffett. His name was Jim, for the purpose of the story. Was driving around Omaha with Buffett in late 2009. The global economy was crippled at this point, and Omaha was no exception. Stores were closed, businesses were boarded up. Jim said to Warren, "It's so bad right now. How does the economy ever bounce back from this?" Warren said, "Jim, do you know what the best-selling candy bar was in 1962? "No," Jim said. "Snickers," said Warren. "And do you know what the best-selling candy is today?" Warren said. "No," said Jim. "Snickers," said Warren. And the conversation stopped. And at that point, he was obviously saying things that have always been will always be. So that's the message that we want to portray here, Ben, that some things will always be. There are the equivalent of Snickers in the property game.
Yeah, and when we think about that, adding to what Bryce was talking about in those timeless principles, what is our Snickers bar? It's land, but it's land appropriately located, right? If that won't change. That will never change. The value of land appreciates. So, and again, townhouses, villas, they come into the equation in our bigger cities. They don't so much come into the equation in our smaller towns and regional areas. So as you work through that process of selection, and you think about, it's just got to be land, it's just got to be land. It has to be land, but it's also got to be well located. So you can do very well also out of townhouses in very rich cities, as well as villas in very rich cities, because they still represent scarcity. They still represent independent living. And people value that independent living as well. So I think it's a great way to finish off. Some things never change, and it's land to asset ratio that never changes.
Now, folks, here's our hope. We obviously have invested a lot of energy into this episode because it could quite possibly be one of the most important episodes that we do. Because if someone like Troy, and hopefully that's helped you, Troy, can hear that and use that as a catalyst to help make decisions. Because what we do know is the number one secret for success. Now, Ben, we've interviewed scores and scores of people. We've done this ourselves. We've had many conversations. We've taken a lot of people to the mountain. We've been to the mountain. So you want to lean in on this one, folks. This is the number one secret that we've observed over that whole journey. And it's simply this: taking action. It's taking action. If you don't take action, everything just becomes a barbecue story. So hopefully, if we want people to take action, but we don't want people to take action and then go, "Oh, I made the wrong I made the wrong move. So our hope is if you've heard this message and it has resonated with you today, we're going to ask you a favor. Will you share this episode with someone who needs to hear it? If you've been listening to us for some time and you've been talking to friends at a barbecue and they might not be able to understand why you would buy established over new, why you don't know, why you can't understand why the Spruikers exist, we're asking the favor of you also. Will you share this episode? Will you take a screenshot and send it to someone you know who needs to hear the information that we've just shared? Because hopefully it becomes the most shared episode we have ever done. Because if you understand the fundamentals of what we've just described today, hopefully in 10 years' time, in 15 years' time, in 20 years' time, we bump into you in the street and you say, I did what you said. I made sure I bought an established property and it has made all the difference in the performance of my portfolio and therefore in your lifestyle by design, Ben.
Well said, mate. Well said. And yep, double click on that and please act.
All right, mate. My life hack today is it's pretty simple. I came across this little meme. I showed my son. He goes, "Can I see the meme?" He goes, "Dad, that's not a meme." I went, "Oh, okay. It was just something that someone shared with me. Looked like a meme to me, but it says at the top how to instantly feel better." And so there's a couple of things, right? If you're overthinking, you should write. If you're feeling tired, take a nap. If you're stressed, go for a walk. If you're lazy, reduce your screen time. If you're feeling anxious, meditate. If you're feeling sad, do some exercise. If you're feeling angry, listen to some music. And if you're feeling burnt out, read. They've been very simple
Yeah, I love it.
little suggestions there. And I think everyone could execute on at least 2 or 3 of those so that they could instantly feel better. So my life hack, I actually wrote that down in my journal, Ben, and I've reflected over it a couple of times in the last few days because I think there's some real gold in that for yourself, but also to be able to share with your friends, your family, and your loved ones.
Music's my go-to, mate. Just on that, I've found that there's something about music that just takes me to my happy place. I absolutely love great music, so I will always, if I'm feeling like I need to pick me up, just whack on some good music.
I like it. What's making property news, mate?
Well, there's a couple of important developments, Bryce, that we've seen over the last couple of weeks. Western Australia, we're doing a rental review and, a tenancy reform review like every state and territory has been doing. And we heard through the Real Estate Institute of Western Australia that they have decided to not implement a no-clause termination policy, unlike Victoria did. And here's the reason why, Bros. Their bond lodgements were 22,000 less investment properties in Perth. And so they are experiencing record levels of tight vacancies. 0.6 is my understanding, right? And so that is a common sense approach. And what we've always been saying in Victoria is be careful what you wish for. The unintended consequences are that you are going to see less investment in your state if you keep doing what you're doing. And this is obviously a state that is desperate for property investors. And they have shown a willingness to open the door to property investors to give them a little bit more control over their property and the tenant that they want to select and enjoy safe and quiet enjoyment in that property. And so I find that to be very, very interesting indeed, that a government has actually listened to the market's feedback. And now that, in a way, puts Victoria in maybe, in an isolated environment if we start to see more of that feedback from the marketplace to say that that's just a policy that's one step too far. And we need to bring it back into a more equilibrium that will then give confidence for investors to actually invest money in those states. Number one. Number two, there was a research paper that came out from the Australian National University in terms of their social research area. Ben Phillips was talking about it. recently. And what was interesting about that, I'm not going to spend a lot of time because it's been a big episode, but as we go to air on this, because if you're listening to this recently, there was an interesting insight in regards to the interest rate story. So this interest rate has led to some of the biggest commitments of discretionary spending on a mortgage or household spending on a mortgage than we've seen in a long time. So even though we've had wage growth, we're in that sort of 20 to 20, so I think he said 23 to 25% range. So it's a very, very high level. But what was also interesting in that, and this is again not discouraging or being difficult towards those people who are struggling to find rental properties, because we respect that as well. But what was interesting in the research is that rentals across the country have not returned to their pre-pandemic levels in terms of rental stress. So we're definitely seeing mortgage stress, and we knew that would come with higher interest rates, but we aren't seeing any type of rental stress at the levels that we saw pre-pandemic. And now this is a social research university-led research piece. And so that's them telling the truth. So as much as we hear from the Greens party and potentially some parts of politics that there's a massive rental crisis here, and there is definitely rental stress out there, it's actually not as high a rents as what people were paying pre-pandemic. So I do expect that to change over time, but I just wanted to give a little bit more context in terms of what media you might be listening to, and in terms of how that's informing your opinion. It's not as bad as people out there, because it's what it's telling us is that there's a lot of good landlords who are looking after their tenants. And yes, asking rents are definitely going up and advertised rents are definitely going up, but there is a lot of great tenant landlord relationships. And if those tenants are in a comfortable financial position where they don't have to be aggressive on those rents, we're seeing that show up in the data as well. And I compliment those investors who are in a position to help out their tenants in some respects, because it is difficult out there.
Yeah, it is, mate. It is. And of course, interest rates went up this week. You covered that so hopefully you've had a little listen to what you said in the RBA update that you did a couple of days ago, so people can go and check that out as well. And we'll probably have more to say on that next week as well. So, mate, I've been looking forward to this episode, I've got to say. It is obviously a dust off and a refresh of that the 11th episode we ever did. Incidentally, Ben, at the time I wrote it down. We were celebrating 3,500 downloads at the end of that episode.
Okay,
right, and now we're over 20 million or approaching 20 million. So it's been a wonderful ride. But in that 8 years, that has been the recurring theme that we have experienced, where people say, I've listened, and what do you think about this property? Or they're still getting burnt, or they're still getting sprung by the wrong thing. And that was the initial mission from this podcast way back in the beginning days, where you and I had that first conversation. We go, another one's got stung. So if we're true to the purpose of being able to help people, hopefully this refresher. Yeah. Clearly, we went longer than 25 minutes. We thought it was worth going longer than 25 minutes.
Don't be seduced by the bling, and don't be seduced by all the other things we've told you about, including what they'll also tell you is you'll get higher rents with a new property. Yeah. I think we've done it well. Hopefully people will use this as a reference episode for the future.
Give us some feedback, folks. Let us know if that hit the mark. Again, if you are able to help us spread the message, if you could share this with as many people as you think needs to hear that message, we would be grateful for us to build out this community as well. So, mate, always a pleasure to riff it with you. It was a pleasure back in May 2015. It's been a pleasure today. Until next week, mate.
Well, the feeling is mutual, my friend. But until next week, mate, knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it.
Well said. See you next week, folks.